Welcome to another episode of the 209 podcast. On today's episode, we have UC Merced expert of virology, Dr. Juris Grasis, who we actually spoke to back in March at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. We wanted to bring Juris back on and get an update on the pandemic locally and talk to him about the vaccines that are rolling out and what that might mean for the future. Now, before we get into the conversation, I wanted to say a special thank you to our sponsor of this episode, Santa HQ at Vintage Fair Mall. Now, let's talk to Juris. Juris, thank you so much for coming on the 209 podcast again. It was March when we last spoke, and this pandemic was just getting underway. It was new. It was scary to all of us. Now it seems like kind of part of normal life. But I wanted to ask you, how have you been over the past 9 months? What's life looked like for you?
Yeah, it's been an emotional roller coaster for everyone, hasn't it? It's been simultaneously the longest year possible, and each day, and then you look at as the year went on, it's also like the shortest year imaginable, and then all the ups and downs associated with that for everybody. I think everybody can now say that they're accomplished virologists. We all understand virology a little bit better,
At least on
and
Facebook.
and we're all tired of this. I understand pandemic fatigue, and how we all could be very tired about dealing with this for so long. So thankfully, hope is on the horizon, and we can have a little bit more optimism for the coming year.
Yeah, what has teaching been like? You're a professor at UC Merced. How has it been the past 9 months, the end of last semester and now headed into this school year?
Well, this is what we do all the time now. We just sit in front of a screen and talk to students and give lectures and try our best to convey information. And so it's been a change teaching wise. But mostly I have to give credit to the students and their adaptability and ability to change during this time and take on the new role. I feel for students all throughout all of education I think where education works best is if you can personally interact with students. And the fact that so many students from elementary school up to college have adapted to this temporary new normal is a credit to them.
Yeah. So like I mentioned, it's been 9 months since we last spoke. And when we spoke last time, you really emphasized the importance of people taking this seriously, people social distancing. There were no mask mandates yet, but, we all know that's an important part of it. Have the last 9 months played out how you expected them to back in March when this first began?
I had more optimism in March and hoping that we would all take this very seriously and take what health professionals told us to do, such that we could have some amount of normalcy this year and keep our businesses afloat as a result. It hasn't worked out as well as I would have hoped at that time. The virus has stayed around enough that now in the fall we have a very extreme pandemic happening, and it's unfortunate, really, but I do hope that for the most part people have taken it seriously and taken the health professionals' advice and do what they need to do to help and prevent the spread of the virus.
Yeah, we're in the middle of this second surge and this second huge spike in cases locally. What do you think went wrong? I know over the summer, a lot of blame was placed on Memorial Day weekend and gatherings. Now it looks like Thanksgiving was a huge issue. But aside from those two things, what did you see as someone who's an expert in how these diseases spread and how they go from person to person?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question. I mean, I think that we, need more concentrated leadership overall, knowing, that we're not reliant just upon ourselves to make these decisions, but also knowing that government has our back at many different layers and shows the example of how best to act. And I understand fully that people want to go see their families. We had a newborn baby this year, and each of our families haven't seen her yet, only by FaceTime or video. And so I have every feeling that we want to interact with families. But I think it's best, for our families and for our communities to, continue to stay separated until we can get to the point of eliminating this virus or eliminating the spread of this virus through population immunity.
Yeah. As of today, 323,000 Americans have died of COVID-19. If I had presented that number to you back in March, what would your reaction would have been? Is that something you would have expected given the deadliness of this disease?
I actually, the number makes my jaw drop. And even then, I actually think it's an undercount, that there's been a lot more deaths that have occurred that we haven't known whether or not the patient was COVID positive, or that the pandemic situation affected their ability to get proper medical care. So that's a stunning number to me. And I couldn't have imagined it in March. I really couldn't have imagined that many people. And it saddens me, because individually that affects so many families, those are individual families that are affected where they could not see that, their relative, their loved ones, and be there for them at that particular moment. And that's a tragedy in itself.
Yeah, I think when you look at it just as a piece of data, it doesn't have the impact that it does when you sit and really think 323,000 individuals with stories of their own, families of their own. So yeah, great point that you made there.
Yeah, it's just, I think that's what we have to focus on as humans, is understanding that it's, individual families that are affected by this, and in many different ways, and it isn't just, people making excuses of, maybe the elderly are slightly more affected by this virus. I mean, that's still people who we care about. So we want to see them get vaccinated first, and we want to see our grandparents and parents stick around to see the grandchild, so the grandchildren. So
yeah, and that kind of leads right into my next question. We spoke in March. I bring up March a lot, but you gave us so much valuable information that really helped me get through the summer and this year, and I hope it helped our listeners. But you said that this virus was not like the flu, like a lot of people were saying, due in part to the fact that there was no vaccine. And so now we're seeing these vaccines rolled out. So what can we expect, and what does this vaccine mean for the pandemic?
So let's think about this for a second. We only knew about this virus, at the beginning of January, end of December at this time last year, right? And then remarkably, we have options for vaccines now. We have 2 different approved vaccines. We have a third that's probably going to be approved in mid-January, beginning of February. That's remarkable progress. Usually it takes years to get a vaccine developed. So these first 2 vaccines are incredible in that they took the genomic sequence of the virus and made a target of it that a year later, or less than a year later, was approved on an emergency basis, but approved enough that we can take this vaccine. And now, we have 2 different options of this class of vaccine. We have a third one on the way, and then there's upwards of 60 different vaccines happening worldwide. And so in the coming year, there's going to be a lot of options available to people. So these first 2 vaccines are remarkable. I mean, they seemingly work very well. Their efficacy is tremendous. The amount of side effects are very low, and it seemingly is going to work for a lot of people. So I would absolutely encourage people, if they have an opportunity to take it, take it.
Yeah. At the beginning of the pandemic, did you anticipate that a vaccine would be made so soon? And
no, great question. Not at all.
Yeah.
No, I think at the time I even said that we there are a lot of situations where we don't have a vaccine against a virus, and that was a real possibility at the time. So there could have been a lot of companies who were developing the vaccines, but they weren't really effective. So, at the time, before we realized the effectiveness of these first 2 vaccines, we thought that, okay, they'd have to be at least 50% effective. And the fact that they were over 90% effective was a tremendous result. And I mean, should be appreciated in that sense, and people should be encouraged to take it then, because it's going to work in 90% of the people that it's administered to.
Yeah, and I've seen people bring up that 90% number that you mentioned and say, what is the point of a vaccine if it's only 90% effective? So can you kind of explain how a vaccine works and what it means when one is 90% effective?
Yeah, so vaccines aren't 100% effective. There's been no vaccine that's truly 100% effective, and that has more to do with our individual differences, right? So our body might not react to the presence of the vaccine in the same way as somebody else's might, right? So there's going to be some variation amongst people in how well they react to a vaccine. So the way that these vaccines work, so these initial vaccines are pieces of RNA or pieces of nucleic acid that get injected into your muscle, and then they get into your cells within your muscle, and then they express proteins that are viruses, or virus proteins, except not viruses, and they are recognized by our immune system, right? And so your body's ability to recognize those proteins, your immune system's ability to recognize those proteins, are really up to the individual and how well your own immune system works. And so that's why you'll see some variation in how well a vaccine really works. It's just people's natural response to it.
Yeah, and how often do people have like a negative side effect to a vaccine?
Yeah, it really does depend. It's a great question. It really does depend on the on the type of vaccine and the individual, right? So these are really fascinating vaccines because they don't require any additional stimulation of the immune system. Typically, when you give a vaccine, you need what's called an adjuvant, something to stimulate the immune system to the presence of a protein or an inactivated virus. In this case, you don't even need that. So they just get the RNA, and then it will go into our cells, and then it gets expressed. And then your immune system recognizes it. So that's kind of like a natural infection system, if you think about it. That's how a virus would work. It gets into your cells and it expresses, and then you see these pieces that the immune system can recognize. We're just doing it with only a portion of the virus that won't continue to infect you. So it's usually those adjuvants, those added immune stimulators that cause some allergies or side effects. And in this case, these don't have the adjuvants. So actually, it's a really cool vaccine.
So with normal vaccines, if you have an adverse reaction, it's kind of just like if you ate a peanut and didn't know that you were allergic to it. Just some people are, some people aren't.
Right.
Cool. So, given all the information you just gave me, despite how quickly this vaccine was created, do people need to fear it?
I think it's extraordinary. I mean, I think that although it is a new class of vaccine, in theory, it seems, in theory, it should work fantastic. In practice, it has worked fantastic. We've, tested between the two types of vaccines. We've tested over 100,000 people, and now more than 1 million people have had doses. We're learning as we're going along how safe and truly effective it really is. And the nice thing too is you to think about is if there's any indication, anything that says that this is not safe, the FDA will come and say, we're stopping this immediately, right? So that's that safety net that the FDA provides. So I think that people should feel confident that this vaccine is going to work for them, and feel confident there's not going to be any real side effects.
Yeah. How many people need to get vaccinated before we can live life again? Or what are the details surrounding that and the vaccine?
Yeah. So this is a question about population immunity, or what people are called herd immunity. Yeah. And it seems that a large population will need to be immune to this virus for us to feel confident to get back to normal under normal situations. And the number really is upwards of 70% of the population needs to either have already had the virus and survived, and so they would have antibodies against the virus, or they need to have the vaccine. So again, that they have antibodies against the virus. naturally, we're only at about 9%, 10% of the population have been infected with the virus. So we still have a long way to go. And the only way we're going to achieve that is with vaccines. And 70% is a large number. I mean, when you think about, 320 million people in the United States, and we're talking over 250 million people need to be, either naturally infected or vaccinated. And so that's where we need to go in order to feel comfortable about, the virus can't be spread amongst the population any longer. And again, that number is a little bit large, but one of the things that happened this year was in prison populations that are sequestered and they can't move anywhere, and the virus made an outbreak there. It took up to 70% of the population of the prison. Just San Quentin was one example where it stopped the spread at that point. So it's really a high number.
Yeah. And being an expert of virology, do you think that number of people getting vaccinated is possible given social media and kind of the fear that we see around this vaccine from certain sects of people, and some of the misinformation that's out there? What are your thoughts on that as someone who studies this and, knows the facts behind it?
Yeah, it's been hard. I've done a lot of interviews this year, and I get frustrated because of all the misinformation. And I'm trying, as a scientist, you try your best to put out the best information you can at the time. But scientists also speak in a little bit of jargon, in the sense that we use qualifiers all the time. This might be the case. This should be the case, and because we don't want to be wrong if we don't have all the information. And then when we do have the information, we're willing to scream from the rooftops and say, please do this, and so there is a lot of misinformation out there. And what I would tell people is that there are a lot of different vaccines that are on the way, and you have options. I spoke a month or so ago regarding the use of human embryonic cells that were used for the development of certain vaccines. And though, if you are objecting to that in any way, then you have options. These two synthetic mRNA vaccines that are out right now didn't go through that process. They didn't go through the steps of using an embryonic cell line. So, you have other options available to you. So if there's anything that you object to personally, there are options for you to do what is, patriotic for the community as a whole.
Yeah. And do we need to wear masks still if we've been vaccinated, or what's the deal with that?
That's a great question. I would say, and as much as I hate it too, because I'm tired of wearing a mask, I want people to actually see me smile when I'm at a market or a Costco, right, or something like that.
A robber.
But the trouble is, the way that if you get infected with a virus, is that even if you have a vaccine, it's going to take some time for the antibodies to react against that. So during that time, you're still going to have some viruses in you that you can pass on, right? So until we as a population have hit herd immunity, population immunity, hit that maybe 70% threshold, we should still be encouraged to wear masks, just to prevent any possible spread of the virus to people who aren't vaccinated. And that's a real issue. I mean, like I said, I have a little one, she's 3 months old. She can't get a vaccine. We have no idea how this is going to work for an infant. So, I want to keep her safe, and I hope that other people would want to keep her safe as well.
Yeah. And I was just telling a colleague earlier today, anyone that doubts the efficiency, I don't know what word I just said, the efficiency of masks and social distancing. By this time, I've usually caught some kind of bug in the winter months, and I have been as healthy as a horse. So I credit social distancing. I credit my little cave at home that I've been staying in. But given that, and given vaccines and this light at the end of the tunnel, do we need to worry about any type of mutation of the vaccine? I know that's something that's been thrown around a lot over the past 9 months. Is that something that could happen and start a whole new pandemic?
So if there's Actually, I want to answer three things there. One, at the beginning of this pandemic, when we met in March, I had my doubts about masks too, because I knew that the virus was smaller than any sort of mask we would wear. However, the virus and these respiratory viruses hitch a ride on vapor. And the droplets that come out of our mouth from speaking, from coughing, from sneezing. So if we can prevent that vapor from being transmitted around in any way, it's useful, it's effective. And that's what has been shown to be over the course of this past year, that in societies where they are mandating mask usage, you can see the numbers of cases drop. And similarly, same thing happens with the flu, right? I was so worried earlier at the beginning of the fall, where coincident infections between flu and the coronavirus would just cause many people to get sick, or overwhelm our hospitals in ways even greater than they are now, and it would just be catastrophe. However, people wearing masks have actually help contain the spread of the flu itself. I mean, in Australia, the way the flu cycles throughout the year, you can tell what's going to happen here in the Northern Hemisphere by what happens in the Southern Hemisphere and vice versa. The flu was hardly a problem at all in Australia this past spring because many people were wearing masks. So take the good with the bad, right? I mean, the bad is the coronavirus, but the good is that, the flu rates have gone down considerably because people are wearing masks. Now, your third question is about, variants and, different types of mutations that could happen to the virus. Viruses mutate. It's what happens. And these types of viruses are actually really good at mutating. They're RNA viruses. Coronavirus mutates quite well. Influenza mutates even better. So we always have to get a new vaccine every year. With that said, I mean, yeah, there are some new variants that are being discovered. There's one in southeast England that is showing to be a new variant. We don't know yet whether it's more transmissible. It just seems that it's a variant that has taken hold of a population there, and it's the most prevalent one there. Having said all that scientific mumbo jumbo, the vaccine should still work against these different types of variants. The way the vaccines are designed, they cover a large portion of the virus proteins on the outside. So they should be able to recognize a lot of different types of variants. And our own immune system actually recognizes different variants of the proteins as well. So again, I think that the vaccines should really save us against these different variants and mutations in the virus.
Yeah, that's good to hear, because I was wondering myself. I don't know how mutations work, so yeah. That's comforting.
Yeah.
I just have one last question for you, Yuri. It's Christmas time right now, and Christmas doesn't look the same as we're used to. Can we expect having a normal Christmas next year, or what is your outlook on that?
I'm optimistic. Scientists aren't always pessimistic unless we have to be. Actually, I think most scientists are quite optimistic, and I am. I view that we'll have 3 good vaccines available to us by February. I think that most people should be able to get a vaccine, by between March and May, and then by the end of summer, I think we should be relatively back to normal. That's my hope. That's my optimism, and then we can have a normal. Perhaps summertime, fall, and Christmas time next year. I will be so ready to celebrate.
So you're saying I might be able to see Taylor Swift in concert next summer? Maybe.
If you want to.
Oh, come on. Well,
her new album
that makes
great.
me happy.
Actually, her new album is really good.
Okay, see, I knew I liked you. It's fine. Well, Yuri, thank you so much again for joining us here on the 209 podcast. We appreciate it more than you know. The information you share is so valuable, and just thank you so much.
And I thank you for your work as well. I think you've done a very good job at helping spread information in these Central Valley communities. I've been enjoying following what you do.
Thank you so much. Have a good Christmas.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.